So this next panel is an exciting panel because it is a discussion on something that has been implemented and how we proceed on, but I always try to start each of these panels with a bit of a laugh. So I have two very serious questions for each and every one of us here in attendance. Number one, who designs a resort with one elevator 5 miles away from the lobby? Number two, when you've stepped out of your hotel room and down that 100 or 200 yard lobby, aren't you expecting those two twins from The Shining to be standing there? So last year at the summit, we introduced the Eliminate the Wait Toolkit. In the second year of its initiative, our panel will highlight the newly launched creative solutions to inpatient competency restoration crisis. Our moderator in this panel is the JCMH Executive Director, Kristi Taylor. By the way, without her, none of this exists. Give her a round of applause, though. She has over 25 years of experience as an attorney in policy making, focusing her efforts on issues such as mental health, psychotropic medication, trauma-informed care, implicit bias, and state-tribal collaboration. In 2017, Ms. Taylor spearheaded the planning for the new Judicial Commission on Mental Health and was named the Executive Director in 2018. We also call her boss. Ms. Taylor has been nationally recognized for her groundbreaking work with the JCMH. On this panel today, we are fortunate to have most excellent speakers. Catherine Bialick is the Senior Advisor to the Office of the State's Forensic Director at the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. Ms. Bialick supports the State Forensic Director by leading innovative, statewide strategy planning, policy, and technical assistance initiatives. Prior to joining the HHSC, Ms. Bialick was a criminal justice major for Arnold Ventures, AV, a national philanthropic dedicated to maximizing opportunity and minimizing injustice. By her side, you'll see Adrienne Kennedy. She is an educator and a researcher who has served as the past president of NAMI, the National Alliance of the Mentally Ill, for mental illness, and continues to serve as the executive committee of NAMI's national board. She also serves on the board of NAMI Central Texas. After decades of family experiences with mental health issues over 5 generations, Ms. Kennedy now focuses her efforts on mental health, education, and qualitative research and promising practices for improving outcomes in early identification and innovations, community care, and advances in criminal justice and reentry. As well, at the end, last but not least, Colleen Burke-Davis is an assistant county attorney at the Burnet County Attorney's Office, a graduate of the University of Texas Law School. She is a leader in her office where she oversees responsibility for misdemeanor criminal cases, juvenile cases, protective orders, and appeals. In each of these areas, Ms. Davis gives us a special focus to mental health concerns as they arise and tries to use creative, out-of-the-box methods to bring about positive resolutions. So let's give all of them another round of applause.
Thank you, Judge Kazin. We have an exciting panel, so I want to jump right in. So I could have paid Judge Phillips and Erica Baldwin on the last panel for mentioning Eliminate the Wait so many times. So it's great to hear that people are enjoying it and that it's effective. We want to talk today about year 2, what's next. So to back up a little bit to tell you, if you missed it last year, why we created this toolkit. The competency to stand trial process, as you know, is designed to protect people's rights, especially when they don't understand the charges against them or they're unable to assist in their own defense. So like many other states across the nation, Texas has a growing wait list. We have increased cost, overburdened jails, and it affects the health and well-being of people in the jails waiting. These are things that you know. So last year, we decided to break down the problem, and when studying the underlying causes, we came up with 3 big categories of challenges. And this panel all weighed in on this as well. So people with mental health and IDD are often arrested when diversion is appropriate. We've heard this today, that maybe we need to rethink some of our practices when we have a majority of criminal trespass and other misdemeanors of people in jail. We also know that there is a misunderstanding by well-intentioned people that competency restoration is comprehensive treatment. And it's just not. If you ever get a chance to see what competency restoration treatment looks like, it's very basic. And I've heard Adrienne Kennedy on this panel say before that her son got sicker when he was going through competency restoration because there is a medication focus on stabilization sometimes and not really at the underlying cause. And so a lot of judges, other stakeholders believe that competency restoration is at least getting your foot in the door at the state hospital, but it's really a misunderstanding. So that's one thing that we want to try to correct. And then there are just inefficiencies and delays that occur in the process. And those are the easy wins that I love to focus on. So what we did is we created a state action plan. We had some legislative proposals come out of this work, and we developed these checklists. If you haven't seen it yet, it's on our website. It's on HHSC's website. This was a joint project between those two entities. And we divided up the work and created checklists. So we have checklists for all sorts of professionals. We started with judges, attorneys, defense attorneys, prosecutors. We went through the mental health providers and police and sheriff. And then we've recently added a pretrial services checklist that has been added. And we had partners look at it, tell us what we missed, sign off on it. And so the Texas Council of Community Centers, who works with all the LMHAs, signed off on it. The Texas Police Chiefs Association, the Sheriff's Association, and the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. So very collaborative effort across the state. We talked last year about what we wanted to do with it. And we've done many of these things. We worked on a state action plan. We've been providing technical assistance. We've developed more tools. And today we really wanted to look at what we missed. So the categories that we identified as this panel were 4. That some counties reported that they didn't know how to get started, that it was a bit overwhelming, that there were so many suggestions on the list and that some of them were out of reach. So that was one gap. Another was specifically rural needs. We also noticed that we needed to have a section on family engagement. And so we are actually in the process of creating a companion guide for family members that will explain some of these processes and then also do the same thing, key people to what they can be doing to help. And then the 4th gap that we noticed is that sometimes you really just need hands-on training. You know, when you're really in crisis and you're stretched to the end, you don't want to read something out of a book. And so HHSC has taken the lead on creating some new training that Katie's going to tell us about. So the part that I want to share is I kept hearing one overwhelming question whenever we would bring this to counties. And I'm sure y'all have heard this: divert to what? I felt like it needed to be a t-shirt. Divert to what? And it's a fair question. I don't want to deny that lack of beds is not affecting our state and our nation. But I know that the state is working on that problem and that it is something that is shared. What I want to talk about is what else can we do while they're building beds, while they're developing workforce, while we're waiting for all of those things to come online. I think sometimes we get stuck thinking that diversion has to be a physical space. And I want us to think about perhaps it doesn't. And I think some of the steps in Eliminate the Wait will show you how to do that. So another great t-shirt, an older colleague of mine, I won't name, said something about shutting the front door. And I don't think she realized that that's sort of a euphemism sometimes. And I thought that was great because we'll remember it then, right? Let's shut the front door. And not always, right? Some people we can't shut the door on. They need to be incarcerated. But again, instead of thinking, I think Chris Lopez said earlier, that we're never going to build enough beds to handle things like we did in the 80s, that we have to change course, and that's all of us. We also heard from Aaron Johnson that jail is destabilizing. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot sometimes. And one of the metaphors that stood out for me, did y'all hear yesterday Judge Mack talking about if we know that a connecting track is broken on a train, we don't park an ambulance at the crash site and wait for it to happen, that we call the dispatcher and we prevent it. So I think really taking some of those examples to heart and looking at that, creating the culture of diversion and what can you do first to keep people out of the system is where we're all going. And, you know, in the judicial system, we could divert ourselves out of a job and that would be fine, right? I want to be serious though and realize that there are all different categories of people. And sometimes do we get in the habit of pushing everybody in the same direction? We've looked at the laws and said sometimes the laws are written to push everybody in the same direction. And it was great to have Professor Shannon explain this to me, that he was one of the ones who wrote the original competency restoration law 30 years ago, said he couldn't have dreamed that we would have ever had a crisis like this, that no one was getting competency evaluations, that their mental health was just being ignored. And so the laws were written in a very permissive, low bar so that people would get that sort of evaluation that they needed. So now we have to change course again, and we can do that. So we just need to think about, does everyone need the same intervention? We have some people that need a locked facility, but some people don't. So let's categorize those people and think about, do they need a locked facility? Or do they initially need a locked facility and then they are stabilized and then they can be moved somewhere else? So in some of these categories, I would say, you know, number one, maybe we're looking at our misdemeanants to see if they really need to be in there, if they're dangerous or if there's other diversions. In the second category, could someone get stabilized in outpatient competency restoration or jail-based? And then in the third, if they could go to jail-based, or if there's just efficiencies we could improve in our process that would, you know, shave off bed days tremendously. Okay, so we've had a lot of metaphors. I don't know if y'all talk about this, about the elephants. We talk about there's an elephant in the room, that we don't have enough resources, that it's overwhelming and daunting, and that you should just take an elephant one bite at a time. So I want to encourage everyone, when you feel like that you are trying to create something out of nothing, that there is a way. Because I look around the room and I see some of my rural friends that are saying, you know, you're jail-based, you're outpatient, all that sounds great, you know, your drop-off center, and we have none of those things. So we wanted to look at how to get started when you feel like you don't have those resources. So a little, you know, acronym here to help us stay awake in the afternoon after lunch. The dream team that we heard about earlier, let's bring that dream team together and then look at the eliminate the wait checklist and improve the processes that you can. Not all of those require a brand new drop-off center. There are things on the eliminate the wait that you can do immediately. And what we have seen, and I got this from Elise Ferguson in Collin County, she just started tracking. Every time I moved someone out of jail, because I was using, before we had Eliminate the Wait, she was using her own version of it, of diversion, and then tracking that math and taking it to the commissioners and saying, this is how much I saved you. Now let's take that money and invest on that front end. And so this is, I think, a way that you can create something out of nothing. Here's the math on it. If you are a small county and say you only move 5 people, that's 180 days possibly, you know, for a 6-month offense, $225 a day in jail. That's $200,000, you know, over $200,000. That's a ton of savings, and that's just post-booking. So I hope that we can think about what would happen if we were doing pre-booking diversion, if we were doing all the things on the checklist. And one other thing I wanted to introduce is that JCMH created a diversion ideas for every budget. So this is one of the attachments for this presentation. and it goes through the intercepts. It's color blocked by the intercepts, and it's supposed to lay out, if you hear about this type of program and you think, that's for the Bexar counties of the world, we tried to put another column called informal diversion programs, where you could do, kind of a dupe. You can do a small version of it that is just as effective. And so we've had a lot of stakeholders weigh in and tell us what works for them in that document. So I'm hoping that is helpful. All right, well, I would like to hear from some of our experts in the field about some of these other gaps. First, we would like to go to rural strategies, and this is where Colleen is our expert. So, Colleen, can you give me some examples of how using alternative strategies have helped avoid state hospital?
Sure. So before I answer your question, I am from Burnet County. For those of you who haven't heard of Burnet, because it's not Dallas or Houston, we're about 45 minutes west of Austin. You have to either go around a lake or a federal wildlife preserve to get to us. So we're going to kind of stay a little bit more rural. We're not going to become Georgetown or Round Rock. We don't have a specialty court. I don't have pretrial services. I don't have a diversion center. You name it, all those resources Kristi talked about, I don't have very many of them. So we have to be creative. I spend a lot of time being creative. I have a lot of help from people coming up with creative solutions. One of my favorite stories is about a young man in our community. 8 years ago, Bluebonnet Trails came to me and said, "We want you to do court-ordered outpatient services for this young man." And I said, "What are those?" And they gave me a copy of a form, and I went and read the health and safety code, and I went, "Oh, okay, I get it." So we had a hearing to get him ordered to do court-ordered outpatient services, and we were able to have him use the injectable medications to help treat his schizophrenia. That was good for 12 months, and a year later, we had to do it again, and a year later, we had to do it again. And 2 weeks ago, for the 8th time, I had a court order for extended outpatient services. But in those 8 years, he has not been arrested again. So we had lots of arrests, but he has not escalated up. No new misdemeanors. We haven't moved up to felony. So I always like to tell people that you need to think really long term. Don't think about next month. Don't think about next year. Think very, very, very long term. When I'm working with the defense bar, they're always like, yeah, but you just deal with the misdemeanors. I want my felony case dismissed. I can't help you with that. That's not mine. But if we look at your misdemeanor people who have mental health issues and we get them treatment now, 10 years from now, they won't be in TDCJ. And so we need to be thinking longer term before we have serious victims. So that's one of my favorite creative solutions. Another one that we did, we had a young woman who either based upon a true religious belief or based upon a mental health issue, I'm still not sure, got like 7 fail to ID cases because she was adamant that she had one name, that was her baptism name, and it wasn't the name on her driver's license. My solution is that I'm trying to find a lawyer who will do a pro bono petition for name change, because if we legally change her name, she won't get failed to ID. She has no other criminal history, just failed to ID. So she doesn't need to be in the state hospital. She doesn't need to be in jail. We just need to get her paperwork to match the person that she's going to tell the officers that she is. We've got to think bigger than just convictions.
That's
Those
great.
are a couple of my solutions.
Yeah. So in the rural counties, I know you think a lot about how you spend your resources. What are things that you think are worth every penny?
So we have a couple things that are definitely worthwhile. We have 2 mental health deputies. They are amazing. Mental health deputies are worth every penny. Our mental health deputies not only respond when they get a call about someone with mental health issues, they also work with the folks that we know have mental health issues. My folks who are on court-ordered medications, they are driving them to Bluebonnet for their appointments. They're checking in with them. They're forming those relationships. Of course, they're not in uniform. They're dressed normally, so it's easier for them to form those relationships. They meet with all of us to talk about the individuals and how they're doing so that we can proactively stop them from escalating. We also have a social worker at our public defender's office. She's actually here today. Chris is awesome if we're trying to come up with somewhere to send someone, because often if they come to me and they're like, "We want this person to get out of jail, will you sign off on a PR bond?" Where are they going to go? I'm not going to sign off on a PR bond for them to just go criminal trespass again and be back in the jail in 12 hours. So I need a plan. Give me a plan. And Chris is fantastic about meeting with the families, talking to our LMHA, and finding solutions for where to send people. So those are two of the ways that we've spent money that's been absolutely worth every penny. I'm also trying to convince the legislature, and anyone who wants to talk to their legislators, please join me in this. For rural areas, my solution is a rural diversion center and a traveling mental health specialty court, the way we do CPS courts in rural areas. You can have one judge, one set of court staff, that work with all of the counties so that each county doesn't have to try and pay for their own specialty court that they can't afford, and they don't have a large enough population to fill a docket to make it worthwhile. And if you have a regional diversion center with short-term housing, mid-term housing, medical folks on staff, things of that nature, you could really solve it in areas that are accustomed to working together. And I think that that would be a very efficient way to use funds in the rural area. So if you like my idea, go tell your legislators, because I thought they liked it, but we'll see.
That's great. You know, Judge Polly Spencer had the same idea, and we've looked into trying to pilot that. So if there's interest, contact me. My staff is going to throw things at me right now, but it's such a great idea. We've got to look into that. Thank you so much, Colleen. I wanted to end with, what do you think is the most important thing when trying to find those creative solutions?
Be open-minded. Do not get stuck with tunnel vision or the box of, I'm a prosecutor and my job is to get a conviction. I'm a defense attorney and my job is to get a dismissal. You've got to be open-minded to all sorts of solutions. So sometimes I will dismiss outright. Sometimes I'll do what I call a mental health probation, where there are no costs, there are no fees, there are no fines, that literally the only requirement, go to Bluebonnet Trails and do what they say. Because then I have both a probation officer and the folks from Bluebonnet following up and going, have you gone to Bluebonnet this month? Have you met with your caseworker? Have you taken your meds? And I've got multiple people working on it, and there's kind of a force. Or deferred prosecutions. You just have to be creative, and you have to be willing to listen to multiple people. So I told you we don't have a specialty court, but we will have more casual staffings where we bring together myself, our defense attorneys, the social worker, our Bluebonnet Trails folks, sometimes family members. Most recently, we've even been bringing in people from HHSC and trying to just go, what's our solution? Law enforcement comes, so that we're all making suggestions, and you just have to listen to everyone and be willing to think outside the box.
Thank you.
I'm going so fast.
Okay, I want to talk to Adrienne Kennedy now about family engagement. Adrienne, what do you think is the best way that family can help their loved ones avoid jail and state hospital and all of it?
Well, first and foremost, it's early identification, early intervention, early treatment. But the important thing here is early education in young families, with young parents, with young children. Because in fact, I have to say, you know, and I come also from my education background. I have a master's degree in education, curriculum and instruction. My mother was a special ed teacher. So you would have thought that we would have been able to recognize the incipient onset in very little tiny ways among our family, among the 5 children that I had. Especially if we had connected with the fact that we had some history in our genes back a generation or two, right? But we didn't connect it. Had I had a NAMI booklet called Parents and Teachers as Allies, I probably could have diagnosed my daughter with anxiety disorder and the onset possibly of OCD by the time she was 4 or 5. Okay, but we didn't think that. We thought it was idiosyncrasies of a very bright child. Well, yes, there were idiosyncrasies of a very bright child that then amplified up. The same thing with our son. Our son, the oldest of our 5 children, began to display immense and enormous creativity, but at odd hours. He would stay up all night with writing scripts, doing this, doing that, composing music. It was brilliant and it was wonderful, and it looked like a little bit of mania, but I didn't know to give it a name. And I wouldn't have needed to give it a name if I just had somebody to talk to about it, or a pediatrician would have asked me some of the questions. The work that's being done in TChat, that's being done in Meadows, is some outstanding stuff for getting early understanding, early knowledge about these little steps along the way, because information is absolutely essential. We talk about the stigma of mental illness. Let's say the shame of mental illness is what brings the stigma to have any bearing at all. But the antidote to that is education and understanding that these are differences that are happening around how people are processing, understanding, and living their life. And that's not wrong. It just needs an embrace, a kind of engagement from very, very early on. And by the way, I have now, my husband and I have 12 grandchildren. We're both only children, so you can imagine having a large family is pretty surprising for us. But anyway, 12 grandchildren, and among those, I see at least 4 that have early signals. 2 of them, in 2 different families, my daughter and my son, 2 of them actually have had suicidal ideation as early as 5 and 6 years old. So don't you think that I knew enough to say to my daughter-in-law or my son, you know, they need help. They need to get to be seen by somebody good and thoughtful right away. So that's a big piece of it. It's a huge piece. We know that the stigma really is about the shame of it or the lack of knowledge and the confusion that then besets us. And if there are behavioral issues, and by the way, I want to give a big shout out for a Meadow specialist, Julie Caplow, around trauma and bereavement and grief, because in fact there are episodes of major bereavement in families, especially with COVID, that need to be addressed, and the earlier the better. And young children have this compounds, especially in a family that doesn't know how to talk or debrief on grief. And these are when we talk about being trauma informed, but we have to have trauma humility, not only cultural humility, but trauma humility, trauma relevance. And that doesn't mean talking about trauma, but offsetting it in all kinds of different ways in medical care, in school care, and being alert and effective. I don't know if that, you know. So the education early on is incredibly important because it hit us broadside. I mean, I was in the middle of my PhD work when, in fact, our son's second psychotic break happened, and I had seen a first psychotic break 3 years earlier and didn't recognize it as that. I figured, oh no, he stayed up too late, you know, maybe he's doing some street drugs, et cetera, but we were in California at the time, and he was driving around like a madman. I was sitting in the back seat practically with my eyes closed most of the time because it was too scary. And he said, Mommy, I heard their thoughts. I know what, and I saw this and I saw that. I'm hearing the thoughts, and the aliens are coming and driving this car for me. It was that kind of stuff. Oh. Didn't even know what to do, okay? And that's, here I am. How's that for, you know, intellectual incompetency, right?
No,
anyway.
no, thank you for being so humble about that and honest, because it happens.
Yeah,
all of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know you're passionate about the way that we speak to our loved ones, that there's some new research about
absolutely
how that matters.
Yeah, language always matters, but especially when someone's vulnerable. I have lots of parents and family members that call me at different points in time. And one of the things I just said to a woman just 2 or 3 days ago, I said, consider that, do you remember what it was like for you when you were coming out of anesthesia from major surgery? Well, that's what's happening. I mean, that's the closest thing I can encapsulate for her about how to treat and deal with her son who's in the middle of a psychotic moment. Okay, and that is, you can't speak to them harshly. You know, come on, read Javier Amador again and again and again, and then go find his stuff online and listen to what he says about listen, empathize, agree, and partner. And Javier says over and over again, however long, the whole point is how long can you keep a person engaged, because that engagement is a part of your love. That's how we share love. That's how we share caring. That's how we share being with someone in the state that they're in. So I think Javier Amador's work is very important, and other people's work around how to communicate in the midst of high crisis. And I think that high crisis communication has got to be one of the big pieces. You know, and he says basically, you know, whether it's substance use disorder or substance use, or whether it's psychosis or serious mental illness of any form, the idea is think of yourself in the worst state you've ever been in or coming out of surgery. How would you want somebody to relate to you? And it's with respect and dignity and empathy and compassion. And Javier says over and over again, however long you can keep them talking, and listen, empathize, listen, empathize, listen, empathize. Find something you can agree about. Yeah, and maybe it's only, is it time, would you like to have a meal? What's your favorite thing?
Yeah, I highly recommend it. He just spoke at the AOT conference in San Antonio and blew me away. So
yeah, thank
you for sharing that. Can I ask about, you had mentioned that you would like to see a more robust civil system. It's something we've been talking about a lot since the beginning of this conference.
A more robust, I'm sorry?
a more robust civil system, how that might have helped your son.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, the point is, and to your point, Colleen, I was happy to see, 3 months is not going to do it. 3 months of a court-ordered treatment typically is just long enough to get somebody really angry and feel just really angry. Also, by the way, there has to be not only a more robust system from a court and civil perspective, but also we have to be very caring and careful and inclusive and supportive of our LMHAs and all mental health providers getting more and more and more engagement focused, motivational interviewing focused. There's got to be that. We've got to be at the top of our game when somebody is at the bottom of their life. That's the real big piece here. We have to be at the top of our game when somebody's at the bottom of their moment in time. And that's really important. But in fact, court-ordered treatment was just long enough, 3 months, to make my son incredibly, incredibly angry. And this was when he even told everybody, I'm pouring out all my medication. I will never cross this door again. I will never submit to any kind of treatment or care again, ever, ever, ever. And that's not because the outpatient treatment was wrong, it's that the assistance wasn't there. It was not the kind of engaged care, motivational interviewing care, directed by what he needed and what he wanted. People, even in the midst of psychosis, have their needs, dreams, and wants very much in front of them. And if that's approached, that's a whole different ballgame, folks. That's a whole different ballgame. I know because we were able to, in fact, keep our son in measured treatment across the course of his illness for the first 7 years. And then he had one hospitalization at some place where they were all self-commitment. They had one hospitalization where the people were so harsh and not compassionate, not connected, that he said never again. And then the court-ordered treatment doubled down on that. So, yeah, he died with his boots on, as we say, but he still died. And he died of his illness, which included both mental illness and severe type 1 diabetes. Very tough for a person with mania to manage diabetes.
Well, thank you, Adrienne, for turning the tragedy into just an absolute campaign for education, and you're there at every turn.
It's a campaign. You got that right.
Okay, and finally, we'd like to hear from Katie Bialick about the next steps on training and technical assistance with Eliminate the Wait. Let me move the slide.
Sure. So at the top of the presentation, Kristi showed a slide that showed all of the things that we wanted to do when we released the checklist at the last JCMH Summit. And, we knew we wanted to start it with a set of strategies for different stakeholders that could be implemented, because there's not one model, one approach, one size fits all way of really addressing this solution. And it takes collaboration at the local level, at the state level, to really think about new ways to think about this issue and new solutions that might work for counties across Texas. And so when we were talking about next steps and going through that list, I know there was a lot of things that we identified a year ago. And the first was just the need for more stakeholder engagement. So our team, the Office of the State Forensic Director, has done 10 sequential intercept model mapping workshops, primarily in rural counties across the state, where we've gotten to hear from stakeholders across the entire continuum. We've hosted many learning collaboratives, so you all got to hear a little bit more about the Jail InReach Learning Collaborative, where we've heard from judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys and local mental health authorities to really understand what is working, what isn't, and how can we partner together to really think about how some of those strategies in the checklist can actually be implemented in practice. We've also engaged with different associations. So of course the JCMH, the Sheriff's Association, the Police Chiefs Association, the Texas Council. We wanted to hear from folks because we knew we released this great tool in partnership with the Judicial Commission, but we felt like there was so much more that could be done that translates a document into on-the-ground implementation. And so I think that stakeholder engagement really set the foundation for some of this other work that I want to share with all of you today. So first, that state action plan that was referenced. Soon, the first state strategic plan for diversion, community integration, and forensic services will be published. This was a product of the statewide Behavioral Health Coordinating Council under the brilliant leadership of Dr. Harvey. I don't know if she's still in the room, but we are so excited for this to be put forward because this was state agencies coming together to really think about what opportunities existed. We also thought about opportunities for direct technical assistance and consultation. So I know this is something that we do at HHSC. It's something the Judicial Commission does as well. But not just putting out documents, but thinking about how do you get and really problem solve individually with counties to think about what solutions might work. And so we've done a lot of that. For example, with North Texas Behavioral Health Authority, we brought together Navarro, Hunt, Kaufman, and Rockwall County to do a half-day training on court-ordered medication. Judge Depew has invited us to do the same thing in Bell County. So we're looking for ways to hear what it is that you need. Think about how we bring together our collective expertise between our policy and legal experts, our amazing state hospital team, my office at the State Forensic Director, and of course, all of our other partners on this panel to really think about how we can create tailored training and education opportunities for stakeholders in counties across Texas. We're also making additional tools and resources. So we've been working on a competency restoration decision-making tool with the help of many of you in the room and the guidance of SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Because it is hard when thinking about restoration options. Is inpatient restoration, outpatient restoration, jail-based, what is most appropriate and what is going to work in Burnet County, what is going to work in Harris County? It's all going to look different. And then we're doing a lot of research. So again, I know Dr. Simpson plugged this survey. We do want your feedback. We're working on other studies as well. But potentially something that I'm most excited about, and it's on this screen here, is the Central Texas Regional Forum, the Eliminate the Wait Regional Forum. Because what we heard loud and clear from that stakeholder engagement that I mentioned is that people want to problem solve. They want to come together. They want to bring their community leaders together from judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys and behavioral health providers and the sheriffs and law enforcement, because there is so much collective expertise that exists in each of your counties. Bring them together and talk about these strategies and talk about what is going to work. And I've heard this from you, from Colleen in Burnet County and other panels too. Start small. Start with what you have. You may want, like the whole smorgasbord of the diversion center and all the programs. Like we all want that. But there are strategies if you just start with even those regular waitlist monitoring meetings that we heard about in that Jail Inreach Learning Collaborative call. Those can make a big difference. And so this regional forum that we're planning for Central Texas, it's the first one what we're doing, but we want to take this to other parts of the state, is to really bring together those collective leaders for a day to provide that education and training. We're going to have some national experts come in. We're going to have breakout sessions that are for each particular stakeholder. So the courts will go in one room, behavioral health providers in another, jails and law enforcement, and then we're ending the day with that action planning to say what are 1 or 2 or 3 strategies from that long checklist that you want to start implementing tomorrow in your county to really help reduce the wait for inpatient services. And we think that leveraging the collective expertise that all of you hold, that all of these counties have, that will be coming to this forum, that we can slowly begin to hopefully make a difference and make change. So I know we identified, and Kristi, you did too, last year, a lot of things that we wanted to do. We've been doing them, and we want to continue doing that over the next year because we really see this community engagement, this community work as an opportunity for us to learn from all of you, but to share the knowledge that we are learning from counties across the state and bring that back to your communities as well.
Great. Well, I don't know if this one's on. If there was one takeaway that you had from all of this, what would you want to share with our audience?
I think the one takeaway from all of the work that we're doing is the power of bringing a diverse group of stakeholders together. So everyone has some really great ideas, and we bring so much passion to this work, or we wouldn't take the time to be at this 3-day conference. It's a lot to drive across the state. And I think that in these communities that we're going to, it's not for a lack of ideas of what's needed, and it's not for a lack of goodwill and good effort. I think it's really bringing together that collective expertise and making space to really identify a few key priorities. But I love your elephant analogy. It can feel really overwhelming when we think about our entire system and all of the things that we want to improve, starting from the community to the courts and the jails and reentry. Like there's so much work to be done that I think if there's like one key takeaway, it's bringing together those leaders, those experts in your community, thinking through your entire system, and then thinking about what are a few key priorities that you really want to bring to the top and develop plans and move forward on those. And so I would say maybe that's a plug for the sequential intercept model mapping workshops. And this isn't specific to the competency restoration process, but it's something that our team offers, the Judicial Commission on Mental Health offers as well, is it's really that forum, that model for taking a day and a half, convening your local stakeholders, identifying resources across the continuum, thinking about gaps, about opportunities, and coming to consensus on a few key priorities and developing plans to move forward. We heard from Judge DePue in Bell County. They are moving forward on their diversion center. They have funding committed, a space identified, and that was plans that were laid in that workshop, and they brought together everyone, and they have done incredible work. We saw in Hunt County, they identified the need for more mental health deputies. So to Colleen, your point, like thinking about mental health deputies as a resource, they went to their commissioner's court and were able to secure funding to get more deputies in their county because they knew that that was what was going to make a difference. So I would just say bringing the right people to the table and just identifying a few steps to begin with, I think can make such a big difference and will lead to those larger, bigger, more complicated systems changes.
Thank you, Katie. And we have just a few minutes if anyone has any questions. Are there any questions online, Patrick? Okay.
Well, first, thank you. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. I'm familiar with a lot of the work that y'all are doing. And I want to acknowledge that Dr. Simpson did have peers included in the initial sessions to help develop this material. But I'm hearing a lot of meetings that don't have us in them, talking about us. So one of the things that I would encourage is when you're having these meetings in your county, you have people who've been through the system, who've been through this process, have them in there. Ask what would have made a difference for you so it wouldn't have escalated. And one of the things I will say is being denied our reality is going to make us mad. I may tell you green men are dancing on your head. You may not like it, but you telling me I'm crazy and that's not what's happening, in that moment is you denying my reality. That's not going to be the intervention that's going to keep me engaged.
That is such a great backup to what Adrienne was saying with Dr. Amador.
Yeah,
That,
absolutely.
arguing with somebody is not going to help. And I want to tell you that the mappings that we've done have always had peers in them. You know, sometimes it is hard to get the right people there. But I know in Grayson County, there was a man there that really testified about his experience, and I could see hearts and minds being changed as he was speaking. So it's vital.
I
you.
appreciate that, and let's keep in mind just the trauma response. A lot of what you see is a trauma response. It's not willful fighting what it is you're wanting to achieve. So I ask that we keep that in mind as well.
I'd like to add to that in fact, severe mental illness is a trauma unto itself. And that all by itself needs to be recognized. And if we can really get good at understanding the impact of trauma and then put that in our hearts and minds and our arms and as we embrace people in the midst of a psychotic break or a serious illness. I want to also say every improvement matters. There's no step too small. So for challenges that we face over and over again, please know that every step, there's no wrong door. And by the way, the no wrong door includes us too. And that when I say us, and that means, you know, every little step that other people take that you can use in your space and place, do that. I mean, it doesn't have to be just, you know, we can't adopt it because it was invented someplace else. Let's be willing to see every door as a possibility.
Well, thank you for this incredible panel, and thank you for your time.
Let's